Imagine waking up one morning to find everything you worked for reduced to ashes. Your home, your memories, your sense of safety, all gone. And as the smoke cleared, the cruelest twist wasn't the fire itself, but the person behind it, the very neighbor who claimed to protect the community. This wasn't just a petty HOA dispute. It was a vendetta that went far beyond fines and letters. But when the embers cooled, justice didn't stay silent. Because just 1 week later, that same Karen walked straight into my courtroom. How did it all come to this? When I first moved into that neighborhood, it felt like I had finally stepped into the kind of life I had always dreamed of. The streets were wide and tree-lined, the sidewalks smooth and shaded, and every home seemed to glow with the charm of careful planning. To the outside world, it was the picture of harmony, families barbecuing in the summer evenings, children laughing as they raced their bikes past trimmed hedges, neighbors smiling as they waved across driveways. It looked like the perfect place to settle down, to finally breathe, to build something lasting. For me, this house wasn't just an address. It was a milestone. I had worked tirelessly for years, saving every penny, sacrificing weekends, pushing through long hours with the promise that one day I'd walk through the door of a home I could truly call my own. When I finally got the keys, I remember standing in the living room, surrounded by blank walls and empty space, and feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. I thought I had arrived at a chapter where life would finally slow down. At first, everything reinforced that feeling. Morning walks were filled with the soft hum of sprinklers and the scent of fresh-cut grass. Weekends brought block parties where neighbors swapped recipes and children ran barefoot across perfect lawns. It was the kind of place that made you think, this is it. This is where I'll grow roots. But underneath that calm exterior, there were cracks. Small things, almost invisible at first, like a note tucked in my mailbox reminding me of approved paint colors, or a letter slipped under the door with a fine for leaving my garbage bins out an hour too long. Most of my neighbors laughed them off, muttering that rules are rules, and that life was easier if you didn't question the system. Still, there was an edge to it all, an unspoken understanding that the HOA wasn't just an organization. It was a power you didn't want to cross. I tried to play along. I paid my dues, I followed their guidelines, I kept my lawn neatly trimmed, and I made sure every flower bed matched the carefully listed community standards. But no matter how hard I tried, there always seemed to be someone watching, someone determined to find fault in even the smallest details. That someone was one of my neighbors, a woman whose presence was impossible to ignore. She carried herself as though she owned not just her property, but every inch of the neighborhood around it. Her eyes never missed a thing: trash cans, paint shades, even the way people park their cars. To her, every little detail was an opportunity to enforce her vision of control. People called her strict, others called her obsessive, but everyone knew one thing: she had the HOA's ear. At first, I brushed it off as overzealousness. A complaint about the size of my mailbox. A warning about the color of mulch I chose for my flower beds. It all felt too trivial to worry about. After all, I told myself, what's the worst she can do? But what I didn't realize was that in communities like this, power doesn't always show itself through obvious force. Sometimes it starts with whispers and warnings, with little reminders that you're being watched. And sometimes those tiny cracks in the surface are just the beginning of something much darker. Looking back now, I can see that the stage was already set. The perfect lawns, the perfect houses, the perfect illusion of community. It was all just a fragile facade. And behind it lurked someone who believed rules were weapons, and that anyone who dared to step out of line deserved to be punished. At the time, I still believed I was living in a safe neighborhood, surrounded by people who cared about community. I didn't know yet that one person's obsession with control could unravel it all. And I certainly didn't know how far she was willing to go to prove her power. It started small, almost laughably small. One afternoon, I opened my mailbox and pulled out a neatly folded letter with the HOA seal at the top. Inside, in carefully worded but unmistakably cold language, I was informed that I was in violation of community standards. The offense? A seasonal wreath I had hung on my front door, too bright, apparently, and not part of the approved decoration palette. I remember standing there, staring at the paper in disbelief, thinking it had to be some kind of mistake. But across the street, standing with her arms folded and a smirk tugging at her lips, was my neighbor, Karen. And in that moment, I understood this wasn't about a wreath. It was about control. I thought ignoring it would make it go away. I removed the wreath, paid the fine, and went about my life. But the letters didn't stop. Each week brought something new. My trash bin set out 15 minutes too early, my grass a shade outside the approved tone, even a complaint about the way my curtains looked from the street. At first, I tried to laugh it off. How could anyone care this much about curtains? But then came the fines. $50, $100, $200, and always with the same signature at the bottom of each letter. Hers. She wasn't just a neighbor with too much time on her hands. She was the HOA president, and she wielded that position like a weapon. The first time I was called into a board meeting, I walked into a room that felt more like a courtroom than a community gathering. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and a long folding table stretched across the center. On one side sat the board, neighbors in business casual clothing, shuffling papers, avoiding eye contact. At the head of the table sat Karen, pearl necklace gleaming under the harsh light, pastel cardigan perfectly pressed, her expression one of smug authority. She didn't waste time. With a stack of photos and letters in front of her, she laid out every supposed violation I had committed: my mailbox size, my flower bed mulch, my garbage bins. Each one delivered with the tone of someone exposing a criminal. I tried to defend myself, pointing out how absurd it all was, but the others barely looked at me. Some nodded in agreement with her. Others kept their eyes down. It was clear she wasn't just a member of the HOA. She was the HOA. That meeting ended with another fine, another warning, and the unmistakable message that I was on thin ice. As I walked out, Karen's eyes followed me, sharp and cold. For the first time, I felt it, fear, not of the fines, not of the rules, but of what she might do next if I kept standing my ground. After that, the harassment escalated in ways that went beyond official letters. At night, I'd notice her outside, flashlight in hand, inspecting my flower beds like a detective at a crime scene. I'd wake up in the morning to find notes taped to my door, handwritten reminders of the rules, signed only with her initials. Once, I came home from work to find my garden torn apart, plants uprooted, mulch scattered. No one saw her do it, of course, but I didn't need proof. I knew. It wasn't just me she targeted. I started hearing whispers from other neighbors. Some avoided me altogether, afraid that being seen with me would put them on her bad side. Others admitted they had been fined too, but none to the extent I had. "She's making an example out of you," one whispered when no one was around. And I knew they were right. The isolation was the worst part. A neighborhood that once felt like home now felt like enemy territory. I'd walk down the street and feel curtains twitch as people peered out. Conversations would stop when I approached. Karen's influence wasn't just in the letters. It was in the fear she spread, the way she convinced people that crossing her meant consequences. And then, the night everything changed. I had just gone to bed when I smelled it, smoke. At first, I thought it was coming from outside, maybe a neighbor's barbecue left unattended. But within minutes, the alarms blared, and I saw it. Flames bright and furious, tearing through the downstairs windows. I scrambled to get out, choking on the thick black smoke, stumbling barefoot onto the lawn as neighbors gathered, shouting, pointing, calling 911. My home, the place I had worked so hard for, was an inferno. Every photo, every piece of furniture, every memory, gone in a matter of minutes. I dropped to my knees in the grass, helpless, as the fire devoured everything I'd built. And then, through the blur of flames and sirens, I saw her. Karen, standing across the street, half hidden in the shadows, her face illuminated by the orange glow. She didn't look shocked. She didn't look scared. She just watched, her expression unreadable, lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, our eyes locked, and I felt in my gut, this wasn't an accident. The fire department came, doused the flames, and left me with nothing but a smoldering skeleton of a house. The investigation later called it suspicious, but without direct evidence, there was little they could do. Still, I knew. Every neighbor knew. And yet, no one dared say it out loud. Not against her. That night, as I sat on the curb, clothes singed, skin covered in soot, one thought echoed louder than the fire trucks. This wasn't the end. This was the breaking point. If she thought this would silence me, she was wrong. The day of the hearing arrived like a storm I had been bracing for, but still felt unprepared to face. 4 months, I had been dragged through a cycle of petty fines, relentless harassment, and escalating threats, all orchestrated by one woman who seemed to believe she ruled not just the HOA, but every square inch of the neighborhood. But this wasn't another warning letter or late-night confrontation. This was a courtroom, and the stakes were higher than ever. The silence in the courtroom broke when my lawyer slid a thick folder across the polished wooden table. Inside were photographs of the fire, charred beams still smoking, my belongings reduced to ash. Next to them were copies of every violation letter, each one signed off and pushed through by Karen herself, a timeline so precise it showed her obsession spiraling out of control. And then came the witness statements. Neighbors who had once stayed quiet now, testifying to the late-night inspections, the whispered threats, and the moments she was seen lurking near my property. As the evidence stacked higher and higher, I finally saw it, the crack in her armor. The smug smirk she always wore faded, her jaw tightened, and her eyes darted nervously as if searching for a way out. For the first time, the woman who had tormented me, who had believed she was untouchable, was cornered. And the entire courtroom saw it too. Walking out of that courtroom was nothing like the day I had first walked into it. When I entered, I carried months of exhaustion, anger, and grief, my entire life reduced to paperwork, exhibits, and testimony. But as the doors closed behind me that afternoon, I felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, not because the scars were gone, but because for the first time since this nightmare began, the balance of power had shifted. Rebuilding wasn't just about bricks and lumber. It was about reclaiming everything the fire and the HOA had tried to strip away from me. Day after day, I stood in front of my new house in work clothes, hammer in hand, determined to shape something stronger from the ruins of what I lost. The smell of fresh paint replaced the acrid stench of smoke, and the sound of nails driven into what carried a rhythm of resilience. But this time, I chose a different neighborhood, a place without HOA signs, without watchful eyes waiting to pounce on the smallest mistake. Neighbors waved not out of judgment, but out of genuine kindness. For the first time in years, I felt hope growing again, not in the perfection of rules, but in the freedom to simply live. At dusk, I stood on the porch of my new home, the wood still carrying the scent of fresh construction, the paint gleaming softly in the fading light. My hands rested on the railing as I looked out at the quiet street. No watchful eyes, no threats disguised as community rules, no lingering fear. Just silence, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant laughter of children playing. I thought about everything I'd lost, the house, the peace, the sense of safety, and everything I'd gained, the strength to fight back, the courage to rebuild, and the reminder that freedom is worth defending. And I couldn't help but wonder how many others are still trapped under the weight of HOAs like mine, too afraid to push back.